The road stretched endlessly that afternoon, the sun hanging low and painting the horizon in shades of orange and gold. A truck driver named Daniel was behind the wheel of his heavy vehicle, heading back after a long delivery. His body was tired, his eyes were heavy, and his thoughts drifted between the long day of work and the comfort of home waiting for him. Driving trucks was never an easy job, but Daniel was used to the challenges. He knew what it meant to face long hours, sleepless nights, and unpredictable roads. Yet, through all of it, he carried a simple belief in his heart: if you can help someone, you should never think twice about it. As the miles rolled by, something unusual caught his attention. A car was parked awkwardly on the shoulder of the road. Its hazard lights blinked weakly, signaling trouble. Daniel slowed his truck and looked carefully. Beside the car, a man stood with his hands on his hips, staring at one of the tires that looked completely flat. Daniel noticed the way the man bent down, then stood again, uncertain about what to do next. Daniel could have kept driving. After all, he was tired and still had an hour before reaching his stop for the night. But something inside him told him to pull over. He guided his truck to the side, parked safely, and stepped out. The warm air hit his face, carrying the smell of asphalt and faint traces of the countryside. The stranded man looked up as Daniel approached. He had a calm, almost gentle expression, and he greeted Daniel with a simple smile. "Hey there," the man said softly. "Seems like my tire gave up on me." Daniel nodded, his instinct already kicking in. "Looks like it's flat," he replied. "Don't worry, I can help you with that." The man seemed genuinely surprised. "You'd really do that?" "I don't want to trouble you." Daniel chuckled lightly. "It's no trouble. I've changed more tires in my life than I can count. Let's get you back on the road." He walked over to his truck, fetched his tools, and crouched near the stranded car. The man stayed close by, watching with appreciation. He wasn't dressed in anything flashy, just a simple jacket, jeans, and boots. He looked like any regular traveler, someone who had been caught off guard by the road's challenges. As Daniel worked, loosening the bolts and lifting the car with the jack, the man kept talking to him. "You must be on a long drive yourself. Truck driving looks like hard work." Daniel wiped some sweat from his forehead and gave a small smile. "It's a tough job, but it's honest work. You learn to respect the road and respect the people you meet on it. Today it's you, tomorrow it might be me. We all need a hand sometimes." The stranger nodded thoughtfully. His voice carried a certain warmth as he replied, "That's a good way to look at life." For Daniel, it was just another act of kindness. He didn't feel the need to ask for the man's name, nor did he recognize him. To him, this was just someone in need, and helping felt natural. He tightened the last bolt on the spare tire, lowered the car back to the ground, and stood up, brushing the dust from his hands. "All set," Daniel said. "You should be good to go now. Just make sure to check your tires at the next station." The man's face lit up with gratitude. "I don't even know what to say. Thank you so much. I would have been stuck here for hours without your help." Daniel shrugged modestly. "It's nothing. Happens to the best of us." The stranger extended his hand, and Daniel shook it firmly. There was something about the man's handshake, strong but humble, like he carried a lot of stories behind it. "I really appreciate this," the man repeated. "Most people would have just driven past." Daniel smiled again, his voice steady and honest. "Well, I couldn't just leave you here. That's not how I was raised." The stranger looked at him carefully, almost as if he was impressed by more than just the help. There was admiration in his eyes, but Daniel didn't notice. He was already packing up his tools, ready to continue his journey. For Daniel, this was simply another day on the road. But little did he know, this small act of kindness would soon turn into an unforgettable memory, one he would carry for the rest of his life. At that moment, he had no idea that the man standing before him was not just any traveler, but someone whose name was known all over the world. As the sky began to darken with the first shades of twilight, Daniel prepared to climb back into his truck. The stranger stood quietly for a moment, as though debating what to say next. There was a calm silence between them, broken only by the hum of passing cars. Something unexpected was about to unfold, but Daniel was still blissfully unaware of who he had just helped and how this chance encounter would shape the next hour of his life. Daniel climbed back into his truck, feeling satisfied after helping the stranded driver. It wasn't the first time he had stopped for someone on the road, and it probably wouldn't be the last. To him, it was just part of being human. When you see someone in trouble, you help if you can. He started his engine, ready to drive away, but before he could shift into gear, there was a knock on his truck window. The man he had just helped stood there with a hopeful smile. Daniel rolled the window down. "Would you mind if I buy you a coffee?" the man asked, his voice calm but insistent. "It's the least I can do." Daniel shook his head. "That's kind, but you don't owe me anything." "Really?" But the man didn't back down. "I insist. There's a diner just a few minutes down the road. Please, join me. You've already spent your time and effort helping me. Let me at least share a cup of coffee with you." Daniel looked at him for a long second. His first thought was that he was too tired, and all he wanted was to reach his stop for the night. But something about the man's sincerity made him pause. He wasn't offering out of formality, he truly meant it. Finally, Daniel nodded. "All right," he said. "Coffee sounds good." They both drove to the small diner a few miles away. It was the kind of place truckers often stopped at. Bright neon sign, a row of pickup trucks parked outside, and the comforting smell of grilled food and freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. Inside, the diner was warm and inviting. A jukebox in the corner quietly played old songs, and a few travelers sat scattered across booths. Daniel followed the man to a table by the window. They sat across from each other, the tired truck driver still unaware that the man sitting opposite him was one of the most famous actors in the world. The waitress came over with menus and a friendly smile. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" "2 coffees, please," the man said quickly, then glanced at Daniel. "And maybe something to eat?" Daniel chuckled. "Coffee's enough. I'll eat later." The waitress nodded and left, and silence settled between the two men for a moment. Then the man leaned forward slightly. "You know, not many people would have stopped like you did. Most cars just drove past me earlier. But you pulled over without even thinking twice." Daniel shrugged, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "That's how I was brought up. My father used to say, one day you might be the one waiting on the side of the road, praying for someone to stop. I guess I just remember his words." The man smiled warmly. "That's a beautiful way to live." Their coffees arrived, steam rising from the cups. Daniel took a sip and leaned back, finally relaxing after the long day. The stranger stirred his coffee slowly, then looked up. "By the way," he said casually, "my name's Keanu." Daniel nodded politely. "Nice to meet you, Keanu." "I'm Daniel." The name didn't strike him at first. To him, it was just another name. He didn't connect it with the Hollywood star who had been in some of the most famous movies of all time. And Keanu, noticing this, seemed almost relieved. "So, Daniel," Keanu continued, "tell me about your life. Do you always drive this route?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Mostly. I've been driving trucks for years now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. You see a lot of the country from the driver's seat. You also learn to appreciate little things like a hot coffee or a good night's rest." Keanu listened intently, as though every word mattered. He didn't interrupt, didn't glance at his phone, didn't act distracted. For Daniel, it felt unusual. Most people didn't care to listen to the life of a truck driver. But this man did. "What about you?" Daniel asked after a pause. "You on a trip somewhere?" Keanu smiled, but there was a quietness in his expression. "Something like that. I travel a lot for work. But right now, I'm just taking some time to enjoy the road, you know? Sometimes, it's nice to slow down and just be a person." Daniel nodded. "I get that. Life's too fast these days. On the road, I get time to think. It's lonely sometimes, but it teaches you patience." The two men continued talking, their conversation drifting from small topics to deeper reflections. They spoke about long hours, about the meaning of kindness, about how the world sometimes feels rushed and disconnected. And all the while, Daniel remained blissfully unaware of his companion's fame. At one point, Keanu excused himself briefly to take a call outside. The waitress, who had been watching them, leaned over to Daniel with wide eyes. "Do you know who you're sitting with?" she whispered. Daniel frowned. Just a guy named Keanu." "Why?" she gasped softly. "That's Keanu Reeves? The actor. From The Matrix, John Wick, all those movies. You didn't recognize him?" Daniel blinked, surprised. He turned his head toward the window, where Keanu stood, speaking softly on the phone. The realization slowly sank in, and he almost laughed out loud at himself. Of course, now that he looked more closely, he could see the familiar face, the gentle voice, the same kind of aura. When Keanu came back in, Daniel didn't know what to say. He decided not to change his attitude, though. Why should he? After all, Keanu had treated him like a friend, not like a stranger. So Daniel smiled and continued the conversation as if nothing had changed. Keanu seemed grateful for that. He wasn't treated like a celebrity, but like a human being. That, more than anything, made him relax. They finished their coffees, laughing at small jokes and sharing stories about the road. An hour slipped by without either of them noticing. For Daniel, it felt refreshing. He never expected a simple roadside stop to turn into such a meaningful conversation. And for Keanu, it was a reminder that genuine connections could still be found in the most unexpected places. As they stood to leave, Keanu placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly, "not just for the tire, but for treating me like a normal person." Daniel smiled. "You're welcome, Keanu. Famous or not, you're just another guy who needed a little help. That's all I saw." The man's words hung in the air, carrying a simple truth: kindness doesn't ask for recognition, and respect doesn't depend on status. Neither of them knew it yet, but the next part of this encounter would become even more unforgettable. Daniel walked out of the diner with Keanu by his side, still surprised at the thought that he had just spent the last hour sharing coffee and stories with a world-famous actor. The cool evening air brushed against his face as they stepped into the parking lot, where the truck and car were parked side by side under the dim yellow light of the diner's lamps. Daniel still couldn't quite process the fact that the man he had helped on the road was Keanu Reeves. Yet, as shocking as it was, he noticed something unusual: Keanu never acted like the big celebrity he was supposed to be. There was no ego, no arrogance, no signs of someone who expected the world to bend for him. Instead, he was soft-spoken, humble, and genuinely kind. To Daniel, that mattered more than any fame or name. "Thanks again for the company," Keanu said, slipping his hands into the pockets of his jacket. "I don't often get to sit down with someone and just talk like that. You've got a good way of looking at the world." Daniel gave a small laugh. "I don't know about that. I just say things how I see them. Life is hard enough, so I try not to make it more complicated than it already is." Keanu nodded, as if those words carried more wisdom than Daniel realized. For a few seconds, They stood there in silence, watching the occasional car pass by on the highway. Then Keanu turned toward Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I travel a lot," Keanu said slowly. "And I meet many people. But not everyone is as genuine as you. You stopped without hesitation, not knowing who I was. You treated me like a normal man. That means more to me than you can imagine." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, scratching the back of his neck. Compliments were not something he was used to receiving. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just changed a tire. Anyone would have done the same." But Keanu shook his head gently. "No, not everyone would have. Many would have driven by. What you did, your kindness, your honesty, that's rare." Daniel looked at him, really looked at him this time. The calm face, the steady eyes, the kind smile, it was clear that Keanu wasn't just being polite. He truly meant what he said. Trying to break the seriousness of the moment, Daniel chuckled. "Well, if you ever need a spare tire changed again, you know who to call." Keanu laughed, and the sound was genuine and warm. "I'll keep that in mind." For Daniel, the whole situation still felt surreal. A few hours ago, he had been just another truck driver finishing his route. Now he had a memory that would last him a lifetime. But what made it even more surprising was that the evening wasn't over yet. Keanu leaned slightly against his car. "I don't know what your plans are for tonight," he said carefully, "but if you're not in a rush, would you like to join me for dinner? There's a little place I know not far from here. Nothing fancy, just good food." "My treat, of course." Daniel hesitated. He was tired, and his instinct told him to keep driving until he reached the next truck stop. But something inside him, curiosity, perhaps, or the rare chance to spend more time with someone so down to earth, made him pause. Finally, he nodded. "Sure. Dinner sounds good." They decided to leave the truck parked safely near the diner and take Keanu's car instead. As they drove, Daniel couldn't help but notice how calmly Keanu handled himself, even behind the wheel. There was no rush, no impatience, no arrogance in his driving. It was as if every moment mattered to him, even something as simple as the journey from one place to another. The restaurant they arrived at was small and quiet, tucked away from the main road. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming, with wooden tables, soft lighting, and the smell of freshly cooked meals filling the air. It wasn't crowded, which gave them the space to talk freely without worrying about being overheard. They ordered simple food: burgers, fries, and more coffee. Nothing fancy, just the kind of meal that felt comforting after a long day. As they ate, their conversation continued to flow easily. Keanu asked about Daniel's family, his childhood, and his dreams. Daniel shared stories of growing up in a small town, how he became a truck driver, and how he dreamed of one day owning a small repair shop so he wouldn't have to spend so much time away from home. "That's a good dream," Keanu said, listening closely. "Something practical, something that will make your life better. You should go after it." Daniel smiled faintly. "Dreams cost money. For now, I just keep working. One day, maybe." Keanu looked at him thoughtfully. "I think you'll get there. People like you, honest, hard-working, you deserve to see your dreams come true." The sincerity in his voice left Daniel quiet for a moment. He wasn't used to people believing in him. It felt strange but comforting at the same time. In turn, Daniel asked Keanu about his own life. He spoke carefully, without pressing too much, respecting the man's privacy. To his surprise, Keanu opened up more than expected. He talked about his love for motorcycles, his travels, and his belief in keeping life simple despite the chaos that fame often brought. He didn't brag about his movies or his success. Instead, he spoke like an ordinary man sharing bits of himself with a new friend. The more they talked, the more Daniel realized something: underneath all the fame, Keanu was just a man who valued kindness, respect, and simplicity. He was not defined by the cameras or the red carpets. He was defined by how he treated others, and that was what made him truly remarkable. Dinner passed quickly, filled with laughter, stories, and the easy comfort of two men who, though from completely different worlds, found common ground in honesty and humanity. When they finished, Keanu paid the bill quietly, not making a big deal out of it, and they stepped back into the night air. Standing by the car, Daniel felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. What had started as a simple act of kindness on the road had turned into an evening of conversation and connection he would never forget. Keanu extended his hand once more, just as he had earlier when the tire was fixed. Daniel shook it firmly, and this time, the gesture carried even more meaning. "Thank you," Keanu said again, his voice steady and filled with warmth. "Not just for the tire, but for tonight. It's rare to meet someone who sees me as just a person, not as a name. That means more than you know." Daniel smiled. "And thank you for treating me like I mattered. I won't forget this night." They stood there for a moment longer, two men from different walks of life, bound by a chance encounter and the simple truth that kindness creates connections no fame or fortune can replace. Daniel climbed back into his truck later that night, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He knew tomorrow would bring another long drive, another set of challenges, but tonight, he carried with him a story worth more than gold. And as for Keanu, he drove away quietly, content with the reminder that genuine people still existed in the world. What neither of them knew then was that the story the truck driver who changed a tire without knowing who he was helping would one day travel far and wide, told and retold as a lesson in humility, kindness, and the beauty of unexpected human connection. The night grew quieter as Daniel prepared to settle back into his truck. His plan was to rest for a few hours before continuing his journey in the early morning. But before he could climb into the cab, Keanu spoke again, his tone soft but carrying a hint of insistence. "Daniel," he said, "I know it's late, but I'd like to spend a little more time together if you don't mind. There's something peaceful about tonight, and I don't get many chances like this." Daniel raised an eyebrow, surprised. He expected a man like Keanu to be too busy, too wrapped up in a schedule filled with meetings and commitments. Yet here he was, asking to extend an evening with a truck driver he had only just met. "Sure," Daniel replied after a pause. "I've got time. What do you have in mind?" Keanu smiled thoughtfully. "Let's take a short drive. Nothing fancy, just the open road for a while. Sometimes, the best conversations happen when you're moving." So they set off again, this time in Keanu's car, with the quiet hum of the engine filling the silence as they merged back onto the highway. The world outside was calm, an endless stretch of road under the silver glow of the moon, with stars twinkling faintly above. The steady rhythm of the tires against the asphalt created a kind of soothing background, almost like a song. For a while, neither of them spoke. Daniel rested his arm against the window, gazing at the passing scenery, while Keanu drove with the same calm patience he had shown earlier. Then Keanu broke the silence. "You know," he began, "people often think being famous solves everything. They think it makes life easy, perfect, without struggles. But that's not true. Fame gives you attention, but it doesn't give you peace. And peace, that's what we all really want, isn't it?" Daniel turned toward him, listening intently. "I guess so. For me, peace is a quiet night after a long day of driving. For someone like you, I'd imagine peace is harder to find." Keanu gave a small nod. "You're right. Sometimes I feel like I'm always being watched, always expected to be someone I'm not. That's why tonight matters so much. You didn't treat me like an image or a name. You treated me like a man with a flat tire, nothing more, nothing less. That kind of honesty is rare." Daniel smiled faintly. "Well, you are a man with a flat tire. Fame doesn't change the fact that rubber wears out on the road. Keanu laughed, and the sound filled the car warmly. That's exactly why I appreciate you, Daniel. You keep things simple. You remind me of what really matters. Their drive continued, weaving through the quiet countryside. At one point, Keanu pulled into a rest area overlooking a wide field. They parked and stepped out, the crisp night air surrounding them. Above, the stars stretched endlessly, clear and bright without the noise of city lights. For a few minutes, they simply stood there in silence, taking in the view. Daniel found himself unexpectedly at peace, the kind of peace he rarely felt even during his breaks on the road. You know, Keanu said quietly, moments like this are what I live for. Not the cameras, not the red carpets. Just standing here, breathing in the night, sharing space with someone who sees the world the way it really is. Daniel glanced at him. Funny thing is, I've been driving for years, stopping at places like this almost every week. But tonight feels different. Maybe it's because I'm not alone this time. Keanu nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars. It's different because of connection. You can drive 1,000 miles, see 1,000 faces, but real connections, they're rare. They're the ones that stay with you. They continued talking, their conversation flowing deeper. Daniel shared how he sometimes felt invisible on the road, like just another trucker people passed by without noticing. Keanu admitted he sometimes felt the opposite, too visible, recognized everywhere, unable to blend in. It's strange, isn't it? Daniel said. You want to be unseen sometimes, and I want to be seen. Keanu chuckled softly. Maybe that's why we crossed paths. To remind each other that balance exists somewhere in between. The clock ticked quietly toward midnight, but neither of them seemed to mind. They sat on the hood of the car, sipping bottled water Keanu had brought along, and shared more stories. Daniel spoke about the loneliness of long stretches of road, missing family gatherings, and the dream he still held onto of one day running his own small repair shop. Keanu encouraged him, telling him not to let go of that dream, no matter how long it took. You've got grit, Keanu said firmly. I can see it in you. People like you can do amazing things if they just keep moving forward. Daniel appreciated the words, though he didn't fully know how to respond. Compliments like that weren't common in his life. Yet, in Keanu's voice, there was no exaggeration, only truth. As the hour passed, Daniel noticed how comfortable it felt to talk to him. There was no sense of distance, no feeling that he was speaking to someone unreachable. Keanu was simply a man, grounded and open, the kind of person anyone would want as a friend. Eventually, Keanu glanced at his watch and sighed softly. We should probably head back. You've got miles to drive tomorrow, and I don't want to keep you out too late. Daniel agreed, though part of him wished the night wouldn't end. They climbed back into the car and began the return journey, the highway now nearly empty. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was the kind of silence that comes after trust has been built, a silence filled with unspoken respect. When they returned to the diner's parking lot where Daniel's truck was waiting, they lingered for a few more minutes. Neither seemed in a rush to say goodbye. Finally, Keanu extended his hand once again, that same strong but humble handshake. Daniel, he said, his voice carrying both gratitude and sincerity, tonight was special. Not because of who I am, but because of who you are. You reminded me of the good in people, and I'll carry that with me. Daniel shook his hand firmly. And you reminded me that fame doesn't change the heart. I'll carry that too. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two men from completely different worlds, united by an ordinary flat tire that had turned into something extraordinary. Then Keanu smiled, a quiet, genuine smile, and stepped back toward his car. Daniel watched him leave, the tail lights disappearing into the night. He climbed into his truck, leaned back in the seat, and let out a long breath. The road would call him again in the morning, but tonight would remain etched in his memory forever. The next hour had been more than just time passing, it had been a gift, a reminder that life is not only about where you're headed but also about the people you meet along the way. The parking lot was quiet again once Keanu's car disappeared into the distance. Daniel sat in his truck, staring at the steering wheel for a long moment, his mind replaying everything that had just happened. Only a few hours ago, he had been another tired trucker heading home after a long day. Now, he had shared coffee, dinner, and an unforgettable evening with one of the most famous actors in the world. Yet what struck him most was not the celebrity aspect of it all, but how ordinary, kind, and human Keanu Reeves had been. Daniel leaned back in his seat, resting his head against the cushion. He thought about the way Keanu had listened to him, really listened, without distraction. He thought about the laughter they had shared over simple jokes, the quiet moments staring at the stars, and the honesty in Keanu's words about life, fame, and peace. Those memories felt more valuable than any amount of money or fame could have been. When he finally closed his eyes, the night's images stayed vivid. He knew this story would live with him forever, not as a tale of meeting a celebrity, but as a story about kindness meeting kindness, and two strangers finding common ground on a lonely stretch of highway. The next morning, Daniel woke up early as always, stretching his stiff body before starting his truck. The road ahead was waiting, miles upon miles of driving, deliveries, and the familiar rhythm of his life. Yet, something in him felt different. He had a new sense of calm, a new sense of meaning, as if the night before had left a quiet mark on his heart. He grabbed a cup of coffee at the diner before heading out, and the same waitress from the night before spotted him. She hurried over, excitement written all over her face. "You really didn't know, did you?" she asked. Daniel chuckled. "No, I didn't. I thought he was just another guy with a flat tire." She shook her head in amazement. "You had dinner with Keanu Reeves? People would give anything for that chance." Daniel smiled softly. "Yeah, but I think the reason it mattered was because I didn't know. I wasn't trying to impress him, and he wasn't trying to impress me. It was just two people talking. That's what made it real." The waitress nodded thoughtfully, her expression softening. "That's probably why he liked being around you. Most people don't treat him like a regular man." Daniel paid for his coffee, wished her a good day, and climbed back into his truck. The engine rumbled to life, and soon he was back on the highway, watching the sun rise over the fields. The world looked the same, but he carried something new with him, a memory that would remind him of the power of simple kindness. As the days passed, Daniel returned to his routine. Long hours, heavy loads, truck stops, and quiet nights in the cab. But every so often, when the road stretched on endlessly and loneliness crept in, he would think back to that night. He would remember Keanu's words about peace, about connection, about the importance of treating people with respect no matter who they were. Those thoughts gave him strength, reminding him that his life, though simple, had meaning. Weeks later, while sitting in another diner miles away from where the encounter had happened, Daniel overheard a group of people talking at the next table. They were excitedly discussing a news story. "Did you hear about that truck driver who helped Keanu Reeves change a tire?" one of them said. Apparently, he didn't even know who Keanu was. They ended up having dinner together. Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. He turned his head slightly and saw the group scrolling through their phones, reading from an article. There were photos someone must have taken at the diner, blurry but recognizable. Him and Keanu, sitting by the window, drinking coffee. He smiled to himself, shaking his head. Somehow, the story had made its way into the world, spreading like wildfire. People were fascinated, not because a celebrity had car trouble, but because of the humility on both sides. The comments on the article, as Daniel peeked over, were filled with admiration. "Keanu Reeves is the most down-to-earth star ever. That truck driver is a legend, what a good man. This is the kind of story we need these days. Daniel looked back at his coffee, a quiet laugh escaping him. He hadn't asked for recognition. He hadn't even wanted the story to spread. To him, it was never about helping a celebrity. It was about helping a man stranded on the road. But now, knowing that others were inspired by it, he felt a quiet pride. Maybe, just maybe, his small act of kindness had rippled further than he imagined. Later that week, while stopping for fuel, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unfamiliar number, but the words made his heart skip. "Daniel, it's Keanu. I just wanted to say thank you again. I'll never forget that night. Let's stay in touch." Daniel stared at the message, a smile spreading across his face. He typed back simply, "Of course. Safe travels, my friend." From then on, their paths crossed occasionally, through short calls or messages. Nothing extravagant, nothing exaggerated, just two men checking in on each other now and then, reminding one another that their connection was real. For Daniel, the encounter became a story he shared with his family and close friends, but always with humility. He never exaggerated, never turned it into something larger than it was. He would say, "I changed a tire, and I made a friend. That's all." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was proof that kindness, no matter how small, could lead to something unforgettable. Years later, when Daniel finally saved enough money to open his small repair shop, he hung a photo on the wall behind the counter. It wasn't of Keanu at a red carpet event or from one of his movies. It was the blurry photo someone had taken through the diner window, the two of them sitting across from each other, cups of coffee in hand, laughing like old friends. Customers often asked about the picture. Daniel would smile and say, "That's a reminder. Help someone when you can. You never know what kind of story it'll lead to." And each time he said it, he meant it with all his heart. The night on the roadside, the flat tire, the coffee, the drive under the stars, all of it became part of a memory Daniel carried forever. For him, it wasn't about Keanu Reeves the celebrity, but Keanu Reeves the person, who had chosen to share an hour of honesty and friendship with a truck driver who happened to stop and help. And for Keanu, it was another reminder of what he had always believed, that true connections are not built on fame, wealth, or recognition, but on simple acts of kindness and the courage to treat each other as equals. That night, what started as a flat tire became more than just a roadside fix. It became a story about humanity, about how one man's kindness met another man's humility, and together, they created a memory that touched not just their lives, but countless others who heard about it later. And so, on countless roads and in countless quiet moments, Daniel often found himself smiling. Because every time he thought of that night, he was reminded that sometimes the smallest gestures could create the biggest impact, and sometimes the people we least expect can turn out to be the ones who change the way we see the world.